alayhi wasallam. And then, subhanAllah, the fitna comes. And when the fitna breaks out, and confusion arises, and people start to turn on each other. Abdullah ibn Umar, it's narrated that he said, radiyallahu anhuma, مَا أَعْلَمُ أَحَدًا خَرَجَ فِي الْفِتْنَةِ يُرِيدُ اللَّهَ إِلَّا عَمَّارٌ. That I don't know anyone that was more sincere for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when the fitna happened than Ammar ibn Yasir. Like truly in all of this, as people are getting caught up in different things, and fitna brings out the worst in people, Ammar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was sincere for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the narrations about him is that كان Ammar ibn Yasir قليل الكلام. He was very little in speech, طويل السكوت, long periods of silence. You know when there's someone that goes a long time and they don't say anything? Like you start wondering, like, what's that person thinking about? And you start to even poke and say, like, you know, see if you can get them involved in the conversation. So, طويل السكوت is Ammar ibn Yasir. Even though everything he'd been through in all of his lofty positions, طويل السكوت, long periods of silence. And he says about him that the most that you would hear him speak, عائذا بالرحمن من فتنة. He would be seeking refuge in Ar-Rahman from a fitna, from the times of tribulation. And he said, فَعُرِضَتْ لَهُ فِتْنَةٌ عَظِيمَةٌ. And so as a result of that, subhanAllah, he ended up going through a deep fitna. But at the same time, he held himself, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, throughout the entire process of the fitna. When groups started to split, he pledged his allegiance to Ali, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And as he pledged his allegiance to Ali, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he asked Ali, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, what do you say about the children of those that are fighting against you? And Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu said, there's no blame on them. Ammar said, had you said otherwise, I wouldn't have pledged allegiance to you. Meaning, he's a man of principle. I want to see what Ali is going to say, how Ali radiallahu anhu is driven in all of these moments. And what do you say if Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, al-Mu'mineen, is on the other side? Would you count her amongst the spoils? And Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu said, of course not. And Ammar radiallahu anhu said, had you said otherwise, I would have opposed you. Like, I want to make sure that we're standing on principle here, that we're not standing upon something that is batil, standing upon something that is falsehood. And this now goes back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The amount of times that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would say, تَقْتُلُهُ الْفِيَةُ الْبَاغِيَةُ. That when fitna arises, if you want to know where the truth is, look at where Ammar is killed. Like, he's the criterion of truth, subhanAllah. So no one wants to kill Ammar ibn Yasir, because obviously then it would fall upon them that we're the ones who are in the wrong here in this fitna if we kill Ammar ibn Yasir. And Ammar ibn Yasir radiallahu ta'ala anhu was on the side of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So where are all of the different times? The Prophet ﷺ was prophesizing this for Ammar from the day of Quba. And I just think about this and I'm like, you saw your parents killed. You made hijrah to Abyssinia. You just got to Medina. You're tired, you're covered in dust, and you're carrying bricks. And the Prophet ﷺ says, by the way, you're going to be murdered. Like, subhanAllah, all that I've been through. That's one time the Prophet ﷺ gives him the prophecy. Another time was in Khandaq. And Ammar radiallahu anhu, like the Prophet ﷺ, is covered in dirt as they're facing a genocide. Right? They're in the trench. And the Prophet ﷺ is dusting off the head of Ammar ibn Yasir and saying that you will be killed by the transgressing group. And so that's one of the times as well. Another situation, the Prophet ﷺ was approached and said, we heard that Ammar died, and the Prophet ﷺ said, Ammar has not been killed. Ammar is not dead. Like, the Prophet ﷺ was given something of what would happen to Ammar radiallahu ta'ala anhu later on. And on the day of Siffin, the battle of Siffin, Ammar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he finds himself drinking a bowl of milk. And as he looks at that bowl of milk, subhanAllah, it takes him back decades ago, and he says, I remember when the Prophet ﷺ said, the last sip that you will have in this world is a sip of milk, a sip of laban. So he takes that sip of milk, and he goes forward, and he says, أزفت الجنان وزوجت الحور العين اليوم نلقى حبيبنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. says, Jannah has come close. I have been married to the maidens of paradise. And today I will finally be reunited with my beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he goes out in complete peace, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And he was killed, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam indeed made him the criterion of the truth. Right? Like, think about that. The son of the first martyrs. And you think of the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in him not being killed on the day of his parents. Like, he lived all that life. Decades and decades later of khair. The decree of Allah Azza wa Jal to bring his parents from Yemen and Abyssinia to Mecca, to embrace the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then for him to survive somehow that torture of Abu Jahl, and to find himself in that situation, and to be a man who was martyred, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, in the midst of a fitna, and to be noted as a criterion of truth. And we'll talk about the implications of that, especially when we get to the life of Abdullah ibn Amr ibn As, who plays a significant role in that. And so he dies, radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, and how old was he? 93 years old. 93 years old. A shaheed, the son